Linda stood in her own kitchen, blood from a split lip copper tasting and warm, staring at the man she had slept beside for 15 years. He wasn't her husband anymore. He was a predator in a charcoal suit, watching her stumble back against the counter while the ceramic shards of a shattered pitcher dug into her palms. Outside, the sirens she thought were coming to save her were actually coming to arrest her. Mark's hand was on the phone, his voice calm and terrifyingly practiced, as he told the precinct commander, his best friend, that his wife was having a violent psychotic break. The foreclosure notice was crumpled on the floor. The bank was seizing her life in less than 48 hours. And the only person who could save her was a woman named Sarah. The woman Mark claimed didn't exist. As the blue and red lights began to pulse against the kitchen walls, Linda realized the ledger in her hand wasn't just a record of fraud. It was her death warrant. She had no money, no home, and the police were at the door to take her away. She had only one question left. How many other sisters had Mark destroyed before he got to her? The receipt crinkled between Linda's fingers, the edges frayed where it had been folded and refolded. She turned it over, the ink smudged from dampness. Someone's careless thumb, perhaps, or the steam of a hot iron. Sunny Cleaners, the logo read in peeling gold letters, and beneath it, in Mark's precise handwriting, Toddler's wool coat, 12:15. The date was 3 weeks ago. Her breath hitched, the laundry basket sagging against her hip as the weight of damp towels pressed into her thigh. She set the receipt on the counter, smoothing it flat with her palm. The kitchen smelled of burnt toast and the lemon-scented cleaner she'd sprayed too liberally that morning. The clock above the stove ticked too loud, each second a needle pricking her ribs. No children lived here. No nieces, no nephews. No borrowed toddlers for weekend visits ever crossed this threshold. Mark had been clear about that. "We're not ready," he'd said last Christmas when her sister had joked about baby names. Linda had laughed, but the words had settled in her chest like a stone. Now, staring at the slip of paper, the stone felt like it was growing sharp edges. Why would Mark be picking up a child's garment? The mundane act of laundry had suddenly turned into an archaeological dig of a life she realized she didn't fully recognize. She dug through the suit pocket again, her fingers brushing against the rough wool of his overcoat. A crumpled napkin fell out, stained with coffee, and beneath it, a hotel key card. Pittsburgh Marriott, 12/16, 12/18 was. The logistics conference, the one he'd supposedly attended while she stayed home grading papers. But the receipt in her hand was dated the 15th, and the location of the dry cleaner wasn't in Pittsburgh. And it was right here, in a suburb she only knew from passing through on the way to the mall. The discrepancy was a physical weight, a pressure behind her eyes that made the kitchen lights seem too bright, too clinical. She moved through the house with a sudden, frantic purpose, her loafers silent on the polished hardwood. The colonial-style home, usually her sanctuary, felt like a museum of someone else's life. She bypassed the formal living room, where the stiff sofa stood like a monument to social gatherings they rarely hosted, and headed for the master bedroom. In the closet, Mark's suits hung in a perfect, monochromatic row: charcoal, navy, black. Each one a shell of the man who wore them. She checked the pockets of his other jackets, her hands trembling so violently she nearly ripped a lining. Nothing. No more receipts, no hidden toys, no locks of hair. The silence of the house was oppressive. She sat on the edge of the bed, the military precision tuck of the duvet mocking her lack of composure. Mark was supposed to be in Pittsburgh right now, or so he'd said when he kissed her forehead yesterday. "Don't wait up," he'd called over his shoulder. She looked at the receipt again. Sunny Cleaners. It wasn't just a local shop. It was tucked into a specific strip mall near a residential pocket she'd never had a reason to visit. A toddler's coat. The words were a haunting refrain. She pictured a small boy or girl, perhaps with Mark's cold blue eyes, standing in a house she didn't know, wearing a coat her husband had paid to clean. Driven by a cold, sharp needle of adrenaline, Linda grabbed her car keys and headed for the garage. The suburban streets blurred past as she navigated toward the address printed on the receipt. It wasn't far, barely 3 miles from their own driveway. But it felt like a different world. This was a neighborhood of modest ranches and tidy lawns, the kind of place where people knew their neighbor's business. She found the strip mall, spotted the gold letters of the cleaners, and then turned her attention to the residential streets branching off behind it. She pulled her SUV to the curb, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She opened the vehicle's navigation history on the dashboard screen, her fingers hovering over the Recent Destinations tab. Mark was meticulous, usually clearing his tracks. But perhaps he'd grown complacent. There it was, an address on Willow Lane. She'd never heard him mention a Willow Lane. She looked out the window. She was parked 2 blocks away from it. The GPS logs showed he'd been here 4 times in the last month. Each visit lasted several hours. The betrayal wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was a map. Linda watched the house on Willow Lane from a distance. Her hands gripped so tightly around the steering wheel that her knuckles turned a ghostly white. It was a charming house, painted a soft cream with a red door. A swing set stood in the backyard, its plastic seats swaying slightly in the breeze. This was the secret domesticity the receipt had whispered about. She felt like a voyeur in her own tragedy. Mark wasn't just having an affair, he was building a world. He was playing the role of a father, a neighbor, a man who cared about the cleanliness of a wool coat, all while leaving her in their sterile colonial to count the seconds of his absence. She couldn't do this alone. She was a school counselor, trained to listen and de-escalate. But she didn't have the tools to tear down the digital walls Mark had built. She needed a different kind of expert. She thought of Leo Bennett. He was 23 now, a former student who had once been the brightest, most troubled kid in the district. He'd hacked the school's grading system in the 11th grade, not to change his marks, which were already perfect. No, to prove that the firewall was a joke. Linda had protected him then, kept him out of the juvenile system by arguing that his genius needed a mentor, not a cage. Now, she needed that genius. Leo's apartment was a labyrinth of glowing monitors and tangled black cables, smelling of stale energy drinks and the ozone of overworked hardware. He looked exactly the same. Lanky, with a mop of dark curls, and eyes that flickered with a restless, nervous energy. When Linda showed him the receipt and explained the situation, he didn't offer pity. He offered a chair. "I can get into his cloud, Mrs. Carmichael," he said, his fingers already dancing across a mechanical keyboard that clicked like a hail of gunfire. "But if I find something, you can't unsee it. You know that, right? I've already seen enough to know I'm living with a stranger, Leo." Linda replied, her voice low and steady. She watched the screen as lines of code scrolled past, a language of secrets being translated into something she could understand. Leo bypassed the dual authentication with an ease that would have been terrifying if she weren't so desperate. "He's careful," Leo muttered, tilting his head. "He's got a burner email linked to a shell company called Apex Logistics. Creative. Let's see where Apex spends its money." The digital footprint began to take shape. Leo pulled up a hidden GPS log from Mark's phone, data that hadn't been synced to their shared accounts. The red dots on the map formed a cluster around a remote industrial park on the edge of the city. That's not Willow Lane, Linda noted, leaning closer to the monitor. No, Leo agreed, cracking his knuckles. That's a storage facility. Safe Box Industrial. And look at the billing. He's been paying for a double-wide unit there for 3 years. The payments come out of an account you aren't on. The drive to the storage facility was a descent into a gray, rain-slicked purgatory. The sky had opened up, a torrential downpour that turned the world into a blur of silver and shadow. Linda's windshield wipers struggled to keep up, the rhythmic thwack-thwack echoing the frantic beat of her pulse. The facility was a fortress of corrugated metal and chain-link fences topped with barbed wire. It felt like a place where things went to be forgotten or hidden. She found the unit number Leo had provided, her breath hitching as she stared at the heavy padlock. She hadn't come unprepared. She'd taken a bolt cutter from their garage, a heavy, rusted tool she'd never used. The metal groaned and then snapped, the sound lost in a sudden peal of thunder. She rolled up the heavy door, the screech of the tracks set her teeth on edge. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the smell of dust and old paper. It wasn't a room full of furniture or a hidden nursery. It was a library of corruption. Stacks of bankers' boxes reached toward the ceiling, filled with invoices, bank statements, and legal documents. Linda began to dig. She ignored the cold dampness of her coat, her fingers flying through the folders. She found the ledger, a thick, leather-bound volume, tucked inside a wooden crate with a false bottom. She opened it, and the world tilted. It wasn't just an affair. It was a ledger of fraud. Pages and pages of transactions, names of people she didn't know, and figures that made her stomach churn. But it was the signature at the bottom of a loan application that stopped her heart. It was Mark's handwriting, but next to it was a co-signer's name. Sarah Thompson. Who is Sarah? She whispered to the empty, echoing unit. She tucked the ledger under her arm, the heavy leather pressing against her ribs. She needed to leave, to get back to Leo, to find out how deep this hole went. But as she turned to the door, a shadow blocked the gray light of the rain. A man stood there, broad-shouldered and wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit his frame. He didn't look like a businessman. He looked like a man who was paid to handle problems. "You shouldn't be here, Mrs. Carmichael," the man said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He stepped into the unit, his heavy boots thudding on the concrete. Before Linda could react, he grabbed the edges of the rolling door and slammed it shut. The darkness was instantaneous, broken only by the dim, flickering bulb overhead. Linda backed away, her heels catching on a box. "Give me the book, Linda. Mark said you might get curious. He didn't want it to come to this. Mark sent you?" Linda's voice trembled, but she gripped the ledger tighter. "My husband sent a thug to a storage unit to rob his wife?" The man didn't answer. He lunged for her, his large hands reaching for the ledger. Linda dodged him, the cramped space working in her favor for a fleeting second. She scrambled over a stack of boxes, her breath coming in ragged gasps. He caught her sleeve, the fabric tearing with a sharp, violent sound. She felt the cold bite of panic, the realization that this man wasn't here to talk. The struggle was a blur of motion and pain. He pinned her against the metal wall, his weight crushing the air from her lungs. "The book, Linda. Just give it to me, and you can walk out of here." His breath smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes. Linda felt her hand brush against her pocket, her heavy brass keychain, a souvenir from a trip to London, thick and jagged. She didn't think. She acted. She swung the keys with every ounce of terror-fueled strength she had, the metal teeth catching the man across his cheekbone. He roared in pain, his grip loosening as he reached for his face. Blood, dark and slick in the dim light, began to seep between his fingers. Linda didn't wait to see the damage. She shoved past him, her shoulder hitting his chest as she scrambled for the door. She fumbled with the latch, her fingers slick with sweat and rain. The door groaned open a few inches, and she threw herself through the gap, the cold rain hitting her face like a slap. She ran for her car, the ledger clutched to her chest like a shield. She didn't look back until she was miles away, the heater in the SUV blasting air that felt too thin to breathe. Her heart was a frantic drum in her ears. She pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, the neon sign flickering in the puddles. She opened the ledger to the page she'd seen before. The loan application. It was for a staggering amount, nearly $1 million. And the collateral listed wasn't a business asset or a secret property. It was her house. Their house. Mark had forged her signature, using their home to fund a life she didn't belong to. The realization was a physical blow. She looked at the co-signer's name again. Sarah Thompson. This woman wasn't just a mistress. She was a partner in a crime that would leave Linda homeless. The other woman was the key to Mark's house of cards. Linda's phone buzzed in the cup holder, a text from Mark. Still at the conference. Dinner was boring. Missing you. See you tomorrow. She stared at the screen, the lie so casual, so practiced, that it made her blood run cold. She wasn't just a wife anymore. She was a casualty. The morning light brought no clarity, only a sharper edge to the nightmare. Linda was sitting in her kitchen, the ledger open on the island, when her phone chirped with a notification she'd been dreading. It was an automated alert from her banking app. Urgent. Foreclosure proceedings initiated for account ending in 4420 months. Her vision blurred. 48 hours. The bank was giving her 48 hours before the legal machinery began to grind her life into dust. Mark hadn't just taken a loan. He'd stopped paying it. He was letting the house burn down while he stood on the sidewalk. She called him. Her fingers were steady now, a strange, crystalline calm settling over her. When he answered, his voice was smooth, the professional lilt of a man who spent his days negotiating logistics. Linda, everything okay? I'm just about to head into a final session. I found the storage unit, Mark, she said, her voice dropping into the low, measured tone she used for suicidal students. I found the ledger. I found Safebox Industrial. And I found Sarah Thompson. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a heavy, pregnant pause where the mask slipped. But when he spoke again, he didn't confess. He laughed. Linda, honey, you're sounding a bit frantic. Are you off your vitamins? You know how you get when you're stressed. Storage units, ledgers, you're scaring me a little. I have the documents in front of me, Mark. I have your signatures. I have the forged loan for the house. Don't you dare gaslight me. I think you need to lie down, he said, his voice hardening, the faux concern replaced by a cold, clinical edge. I'll be home tonight. We can talk then. Just stay put. Don't go making a scene at the school. In the background, behind his voice, Linda heard a sound that didn't belong in a Pittsburgh conference hall. It was the rhythmic creak of a swing set and the high-pitched peal of children's laughter. He was at the house on Willow Lane. He was lying to her while he watched a child play. She hung up and walked to the garage, intending to drive to the school to clear her head. But she stopped dead at the sight of her SUV. All 4 tires were flat, the rubber sliced with surgical precision. Pinned to the windshield with a heavy hunting knife was a piece of notebook paper. Stop digging, Linda. It's for your own good. The violence of the gesture was a message. The walls weren't just closing in, they were armed. She took a taxi to the school, her mind racing. She needed her office, her files, her computer, her sanctuary. But when she pushed open the door to the counseling suite, the sanctuary was gone. Her desk had been overturned, the drawers emptied onto the floor. Student files, confidential, sacred records, were scattered like autumn leaves. Her laptop was missing. Someone had been looking for the ledger, and they hadn't cared about the wreckage they left behind. The school, the one place where she felt competent and safe, had been violated. She was standing in the middle of the mess, a sob rising in her throat, when she felt a presence behind her. She turned, expecting a janitor or a concerned teacher. But it was him, the man from the storage unit. His cheek was bandaged, a dark bruise blooming around the white gauze. He stood in the doorway, blocking her exit. "You're a hard woman to track down, Linda, but you're running out of places to hide." "Get out of my office," she said, her voice trembling. "I've called the police." "No, you haven't," he countered, stepping into the room. "Because if the police come, they'll start asking about those fraudulent loans. And since your name is on the paperwork, you're the one they'll take in. Mark's long gone, Linda. He's got friends. You've just got a messy office." He lunged, but Linda was faster this time. She grabbed the heavy fire extinguisher from the wall bracket by the door, pulling the pin with a jerk of her wrist. She squeezed the handle, and a blinding cloud of white chemical foam erupted, catching the man full in the face. He stumbled back, coughing and clawing at his eyes. Linda didn't hesitate. She swung the heavy metal cylinder, catching him in the ribs with a sickening thud. He went down, gasping for air. She didn't look back as she ran toward the parking lot, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She found a taxi at the curb and gave the driver the address Leo had sent her an hour ago, Sarah Thompson's house. The house on Willow Lane was even more idyllic up close. The garden was meticulously weeded, the windows sparkling. Linda stepped out of the taxi, her clothes disheveled, her hair escaping its neat bun. She looked like a woman who had been through a war, and in a way, she had. She saw a woman, Sarah, walking toward the front door, a bag of groceries in her arms. She was younger than Linda, with a soft, tired face and dark auburn hair. "Sarah," Linda called out, her voice cracking. The woman stopped, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Do I know you?" "My name is Linda Carmichael. I'm Mark's wife." Sarah's expression didn't shift into guilt. Instead, a look of profound pity crossed her face. "Oh, Mark told me about you. He said you might show up. He said you were struggling." "Struggling?" Linda stepped closer, pulling the loan documents from her bag. "I'm not struggling, Sarah. I'm being erased. Mark used my house as collateral for $1 million loan that you co-signed. The bank is foreclosing in 48 hours. Did he tell you that?" Sarah shook her head, a small, sad smile on her lips. "Mark told me his sister was mentally unstable. He said she'd been draining the family estate for years, and he was trying to protect what was left. He said you'd come here with forged papers, trying to scare me." She looked at Linda as if she were a wounded animal. "I'm sorry, but I think you should leave before I call the police. Mark's just trying to help you, but you're making it very hard for him." The deception was total. Mark hadn't just cheated. He had rewritten the reality of everyone around him. Linda stood on the sidewalk, the rain starting to fall again, realizing that to the world, she was the villain of her own story. She was the crazy sister, the unstable wife, the embezzler. Mark was the hero, the provider, the man of logistics who was simply trying to keep his world from falling apart. She returned to the colonial house one last time, the air inside feeling like a tomb. She needed to pack, to find a place to go before the bank's men arrived. She was in the kitchen, reaching for a duffel bag, when the lights flickered and died. The shadows of the trees stretched across the floor like reaching fingers. "Mark," she whispered. "You really should have listened to me, Linda." His voice came from the darkness of the hallway. He stepped into the faint light of the window, his charcoal suit perfect, his expression unreadable. "I tried to make this easy for you. I was going to set up a trust, a nice place for you to stay, somewhere quiet where you could get the help you need." "The help I need?" Linda's voice rose, a jagged edge of fury cutting through her fear. "You stole our life, Mark. You used me like a line of credit." "I used the resources available to me," he said, stepping closer. He looked at her with a chilling detachment, as if she were a shipping manifest that didn't add up. "And now, you're a liability. Give me the ledger, Linda, and the phone. Leo Bennett was a mistake. I've already talked to the school board. They're very concerned about your professional discrepancies." He lunged, pinning her against the granite island. His hands were like iron, crushing her wrists as he reached for her bag. "You're not taking anything else from me?" she screamed. Her hand closed around a heavy ceramic pitcher on the counter, a wedding gift from her mother. She swung it with a blind, desperate force, the ceramic shattering against Mark's temple. He staggered back, his eyes rolling, a thin line of blood trickling into his salt and pepper hair. Linda didn't wait. She grabbed her bag and ran out the back door, her breath coming in jagged sobs. She drove to the police station, the ledger clutched to her seat. She walked into the precinct, her voice a frantic rush as she tried to explain the fraud, the assault, the nightmare. The commander, a man with a sagging jaw and bloodshot eyes, listened with a bored expression. He looked at the photo on his desk, him and Mark, grinning on a golf course, and then back at Linda. "Mrs. Carmichael, your husband called an hour ago. He's very worried about you. He said you attacked him with a pitcher. He said you've been having episodes." "Look at the ledger," she pleaded, slamming the book onto the desk. "Look at the signatures." "I see a woman who needs a doctor," the commander said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous threat. "Now, I can either call an ambulance, or I can put you in a cell for domestic assault. Your choice. But if I were you, I'd stop talking about fraud before you make things worse for yourself." Linda backed away, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Mark didn't just have money. He had the system. He was the golf partner, the donor, the pillar of the community. She was just a woman in a torn coat, screaming about things no one wanted to believe. She walked out into the rain, the festive lights of the upcoming Founders' Day gala mocking her from the town square. She was homeless, discredited, and alone. She checked into a motel that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair, her last $20 disappearing into the clerk's hand. She sat on the thin, scratchy comforter, the neon sign outside flickering pink, pink, pink against the warped paneling. She felt like a ghost. But as she stared at the ledger, she realized she still had one thing Mark couldn't control. She had the truth. And she knew how to navigate a bureaucracy. She called Leo. "The local cops are in his pocket," she said, her voice a cold, hard stone. "We're going over their heads. I want the data dump sent to the FBI, every offshore account, every forged signature. Now." "It's done, Linda." Leo's voice came through the burner phone, steady and sure. "But you need to be there when the hammer falls. He's getting that award tomorrow night. The whole town will be there. Linda looked at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. She didn't see a victim. She saw a woman who had been trained to read people, to find the cracks in their armor. She had a service staff pass from a former student who worked the gala. She had a plan. And for the first time in 10 years, she wasn't afraid of the dark. The Founders' Day Gala was a sea of tuxedos and silk, the air thick with the smell of expensive lilies and pretension. Linda moved through the kitchen in her server's uniform, her heart a steady, rhythmic thrum. She saw Mark on the stage, the light of the chandeliers making him look like a god. He was smiling, his teeth bared in that sharp, predatory grin. She found Sarah in the restroom, the younger woman looking pale and shaken in a cocktail dress that didn't fit her mood. "He's using you, Sarah," Linda said, stepping out from the stall. "He didn't just sign your name. He's funneling the money into accounts you'll never see. And when the feds come, and they are coming, you're the one who will go to prison. Because your name is the one on the paperwork." She handed Sarah a USB drive. "This is the evidence. If you help me, you might have a chance. If you don't, you're going down with him." Sarah stared at the drive, the realization finally breaking through the wall of Mark's lies. "He said you were crazy," she whispered, a tear tracking through her makeup. "He says a lot of things," Linda replied. Minutes later, Linda cornered Mark in the VIP lounge, the sounds of the orchestra muffled by the heavy velvet curtains. He looked up, his expression shifting from annoyance to a cold, flickering fear. "Linda, how did you get in here?" "The feds have the ledger, Mark, and the offshore accounts. Sarah gave me the passwords. It's over." "You're bluffing," he said. But his left eye twitched, the flicker of static she'd learned to recognize as a sign of his crumbling control. "The commander will have you out of here in 5 minutes." "The commander can't help you with the FBI, Mark. They're in the lobby, and they aren't here for the shrimp cocktail." As the sirens began to wail outside, Linda walked out of the ballroom, her head held high. She didn't stay to see the handcuffs or the look of horror on the town's elite faces. She walked into the cool night air, the weight of the last 10 years lifting with every step. A month later, Linda sat in her new apartment, a small, sunlit studio with a view of the park. The colonial house was gone, the wealth was a memory, but the silence was finally her own. She watched the sunrise, the golden light spilling across her modest wooden table. She wasn't a wife or a sister or a casualty. She was Linda Carmichael, and for the first time in her life, she was the one writing the story.